Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the world. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about those foods you should avoid, which can increase your risk of having a heart attack or a stroke, also known as a CVA, which are the #1 cause of death in both developed and developing countries. So pay close attention. And I'm also going to tell you about the risk factors. What are the best habits for your heart? And also the worst ones, the ones that increase your chances of developing heart disease even more. Keep in mind that when it comes to forbidden foods, it's not like eating something once will cause all this damage, go straight to your coronary arteries, or clog up the arteries in your heart all of a sudden. Here, I'm talking about the foods that you shouldn't include in your diet, in your daily routine, for example. That's when you'll have problems. And many people don't even know about these foods. Many think they are healthy foods. And that's exactly why cardiovascular diseases are the leading cause of death in the world. So pay close attention. Write down all these foods. I suggest you do that so you can achieve better health. Well, let's start with the list of the worst ones. The first food you need to be most careful with is ultra-processed foods. Burgers you buy ready-made at the supermarket, that lasagna for the microwave, for example, that you also buy ready-made in a box, sandwich cookies, snacks. Besides having a lot of sodium, they also have preservatives and a high amount of fats. And if you consume a high amount of fats, especially saturated fats and trans fats, well, don't even get me started. You can have an increase in fat plaques, an increase in atherosclerosis, raising your cardiovascular risk. So it's worth avoiding it. Scientific studies are very clear. People who consume a lot of ultra-processed foods have a higher cardiovascular risk. Okay, what would that a lot amount be? Most studies link the consumption of ultra-processed foods, as well as other foods I'll explain here, to 3 or more times a week. So you see, if you one day or another, every once in a while, eat an ultra-processed food, it won't cause major damage to your body, but it's worth avoiding, okay? Which is quite easy to consume 3 or more times a week. Well, #2, instant noodles. Instant noodles can have 70% of the amount of sodium you need per day, a salt. And we know that salt, for those who have high blood pressure, can increase it even more. So it is very important to control it, not only because of the additives it has, the composition, the amount of fat, just like I mentioned about ultra-processed foods, but you have to watch out for this issue of salt and sodium. Studies show that those who control their salt and sodium intake, consuming up to 5 grams of salt per day, which is 2 grams of sodium, the amount recommended by the World Health Organization, have a 40% lower chance of having a stroke, for example, of having a cerebral hemorrhage. So it is very important to also watch out for this issue of sodium. By reducing your consumption or avoiding it entirely, I suggest you avoid instant noodles completely. You reduce that cardiovascular risk. Look how important that is. This could also be one of the tips, but I'm including it here under foods because this is a very common food, especially due to its convenience, right? And what is the average consumption of salt and sodium? In the United States or in Europe, such as Portugal, Spain, or Germany, this value can reach 11 grams of salt. Did you see that the recommended amount was 5 grams? In some other countries, like Colombia, Brazil, and Argentina, this consumption reaches 10, also double the recommended amount. So you have to be very careful with this issue of salt and sodium. #3, and this one is one of the most harmful, which is foods with corn syrup, fructose syrup, which is used to sweeten many foods, like boxed juices, for example. Many have this in their composition. I want you to completely avoid corn syrup, fructose syrup. That's why many people think that fructose is bad for you. It's not the fructose from fruit. I'll talk more about fruit as well, but fructose syrup itself is also linked to an increase in cardiovascular diseases. Anyone who has this food in their routine, not just regarding the issue of fatty liver, you also have to avoid it if you have fatty liver, but also for the sake of your heart. So avoid it completely. That is my recommendation here regarding corn syrup or fructose syrup. Syrups used for sweetening. And #4 is about lard. Do you like to use lard? I know there are many videos on the internet saying that lard is healthy, that it could reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases, but these are videos that have absolutely no scientific basis. Studies show that the composition of lard has a lot of saturated fats. It's predominant, and these saturated fats contribute to worse heart health. Of course, if you go to a party once in a while and there's food with lard, that's not what's going to do it, right? The key to everything is moderation. But studies show that those who consume it as part of their routine will have an increased cardiovascular risk. Number 5, and this one is also controversial, which is why I put it here in the sequence, since you're prepared and have already received the news about lard, which is about coconut oil. Coconut oil, despite being a vegetable fat, many people say, oh, vegetable fat is good for you, but it's not quite like that. It depends on the composition of that vegetable fat. But coconut oil also has a lot of saturated fats, and it's a very high-calorie food. It has some uses, like for the skin, for example, but for consumption, for those who have high cholesterol, for those who are taking care of their heart, it's not a good idea. So it's worth avoiding. And number 6 is butter. Just like coconut oil and lard, butter also has a reputation for being healthy, but it has a lot of saturated fats. The composition of butter isn't great, so if possible, avoid it. And what about margarine? Margarine, believe it or not, is better than butter. Margarine got this reputation for being so bad because in the past it contained trans fats, but that has since been removed and the composition has been modified. Nowadays, you won't find margarine with trans fats for sale in the market anymore. So if you compare them today, margarine is better than butter, okay? Not that it's healthy, not that I'm recommending you eat it here, but if you have to choose one or the other, I choose margarine for the reason I explained to you. Number 7 is ice cream and heavy cream, fatty cheeses, because fatty cheeses and ice cream are also rich in saturated fats. And then you're thinking, but then are all dairy products bad? No, skimmed foods like skim milk can indeed be an option. Studies show that for those who don't have lactose intolerance, meaning lactose sensitivity, if you don't drink milk and go straight to the bathroom with diarrhea, or if you don't feel bad, milk can be an option, including having anti-inflammatory benefits, contrary to what everyone says, okay? So if you are lactose intolerant, then you should avoid milk. If you aren't, you can consume skimmed foods without any issues. Now, heavy cream and other foods, those are worth avoiding, taking extra care with. And number 8 is processed meats, because processed meats like salami, turkey breast, ham, capicola, prosciutto, these foods are rich in sodium. They have a very high amount of sodium. We've already seen what sodium can do to our body in this video, the recommended amount, but they also have preservatives like nitrates and nitrites, which have even been linked to an increased risk of bowel cancer. So it's worth avoiding them for these 2 reasons, okay? And there, the same applies as what I said for the other foods. Studies show that this risk is increased, like cardiovascular risk, for those who consume processed meats 3 or more times a week. So it's not going to be once in a while. If you really like it, that's going to cause all this damage. And number 9, this one is fried foods, like French fries. Foods fried in oil are also rich in saturated fats, which can increase your bad cholesterol. And what are these 11 habits that you can adopt to reduce the risk of heart disease? Well, number 1 is taking care of your blood sugar levels. And here, I'm not going to focus only on diabetes, but studies show that pre-diabetes values, for example, fasting blood glucose, that test you do at the lab after 8 to 12 hours of fasting, if this value is at 110 milligrams per deciliter or higher, or if you are in a country that uses millimoles per liter, this value would be equal to or greater than 6.1 millimoles per liter. At this level, you aren't considered diabetic, but you already have an increased cardiovascular risk, right? It would be a pre-diabetes value between 100 and 126, for example. So even if you aren't considered diabetic, a value of 110 or 6.1 millimoles per liter would already be a value that increases the risk of heart disease. Glycated hemoglobin values, which you always ask about too, Pre-diabetic glycated hemoglobin values between 5.7 and 6.4 would also increase this risk. So it's not just diabetes, but rather elevated blood sugar levels. It's also important to keep an eye on the test called glycated hemoglobin, which looks at your average blood sugar over the last 90 days. If this test is in the pre-diabetes range, what would those values be? 5.7 to 6.4%. You would also already have an increased risk from a cardiovascular standpoint. 6.5 and up, meaning equal to or greater than 6.5, would already be considered diabetes. Remember that this test must be associated with another one or repeated twice for a diabetes diagnosis. But it is very important to take care of your blood sugar levels. And why does high blood sugar have a connection to heart disease, a connection to fat deposits in the arteries, to what's called atherosclerosis? Because when levels are elevated, an injury occurs on the inside of the vessels, right? It can cause what we call endothelial damage, and this damage can make it easier for fat to accumulate there. So diabetes is, a major risk factor for heart disease. It can damage the inside of your vessels, speaking in plain language here, okay? So take care of those blood sugar levels. Later on, I'll talk more about how to address this blood sugar issue as well. I'll talk about it quite a bit here on the channel. So in this video, since I'm talking about the heart, I won't dwell only on that. And risk factor number 2 is high blood pressure. Studies show that a good blood pressure reading to avoid increasing your cardiovascular risk would be 120/80. That value would be the ideal. Some protocols and guidelines state that values below 130/80 would also be sufficient, but I really like this number, which is 120/80. This is already in the process of changing. Some studies already consider this value of 130, or 13 as many people call it, to be already a little bit on the limit. If you can achieve 120/80, that would be a value considered, let's say, ideal, right? The normal blood pressure that people, the new protocols want to consider. So take care of your blood pressure levels. Just as I said, increased blood sugar levels can damage the vessels. Increased pressure levels also make the heart work with higher pressures. This can also damage the vessels. So much so that, just like diabetes, increased pressure levels are also pathogenic for other diseases, such as kidney changes or even a stroke itself. So it is very important to take care of your blood pressure levels. Number 3 is don't smoke. I won't say much here because you already know. This applies not only to cigarettes, but also to electronic cigarettes, hand-rolled cigarettes, and cigars. But you already know this. Number 4, also very talked about, is the abuse of alcoholic beverages. Studies show that more than one drink a day already increases your cardiovascular risk. Why? Because alcohol, there are many studies, on alcohol in the heart. In small doses, I'm not defending alcohol, okay? I'm just saying what scientific studies say. In small doses, like one drink a day, a glass of wine, for example, could have a benefit for the blood vessels, even slightly reducing cardiovascular risk. But after one drink, that's when it starts to become very harmful. So be careful with alcoholic beverages. If possible, avoid them. If you have any alcohol-related issues, like fatty liver disease caused by alcohol, then it's 0 alcohol. For other cases, for those who don't have any alcohol-related diseases, then up to 1 drink would be allowed. And number 5, this one we can't do much about, which is genetics. When it comes to heart disease, like heart attacks or the buildup of fat in the arteries, genetics plays a very important role. That's why it's important not just to know, but to understand your family, to know your family history, because that can change things when the doctor orders certain tests for your therapeutic approach, including your cholesterol goals. I'll talk a bit more about cholesterol levels, but knowing your family history is very important because genetics, out of all of these, is the only one we can't change. But it's very important to know it, to understand how to change this approach, how to change the treatment. Number 6 is about stress. Stress is also a risk factor for heart disease. We know that people who have increased stress levels, who are more stressed, tend to have more heart diseases like heart attacks, for example. Number 7, sleep disturbances. And here I want to highlight a very frequent one, which is obstructive sleep apnea. When you're sleeping, you wake up, it feels like you're suffocating, out of breath. The people who sleep in the same house say you snore a lot. This can be a sign of obstructive sleep apnea because there's an interruption in the oxygen flow. So it's not just that feeling. You may actually be out of breath without oxygen, leading to what we call hypoxia, when oxygen levels get lower in our body. And this is a major risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. It can even cause blood pressure to become uncontrolled and can increase blood sugar levels. It is very important to look into this sleep issue. And studies also suggest that those who sleep less than 6 hours, or those who invert their schedule, staying awake during the night, the early morning hours, and ending up sleeping during the day, also have a higher chance of cardiovascular disease. So take care of this sleep issue. It's really important. And number 8, which is about cholesterol. Have you ever heard that cholesterol is good? So that is true. Cholesterol is good. We use cholesterol for the production of hormones like vitamin D, testosterone, and cortisol, which is essential for our lives. Cholesterol also plays a role in our digestion, in the production of bile salts, and in the formation of cell membranes. In short, cholesterol has several functions. But the problem here is excess cholesterol, or when the bad cholesterol, LDL, is high, or when the good cholesterol, HDL, is low. What would be a good HDL cholesterol value? Levels greater than 40 for men and values greater than 50 for women. Some references put it at 45, okay? I prefer to use greater than 50 for HDL cholesterol for women. So levels lower than these would also be a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. The thing about bad cholesterol, the so-called LDL, is that it's a variable value. We have to individualize it, get to know the person, understand their risk factors, and only then determine the LDL cholesterol value. That's why there's so much controversy. Some say cholesterol is good, others say cholesterol is bad. And the thing is, this cholesterol is indeed good, but high levels are related to cardiovascular diseases. So, for example, for a young person, an athlete who doesn't have high blood pressure, doesn't have diabetes, and doesn't smoke, for that person, LDL cholesterol levels up to 130 would be good values. For another person who has high blood pressure, who has fat deposits in their arteries, who has diabetes, for that person, this value of 130 would be a very high value. So we want lower values, okay? Values that will depend on risk factors. For example, if this person has already had 2 heart attacks or a stroke, this value would drop to 50. Just so you can see the difference, right? Almost 3 times less than the value considered good for someone else. So be very careful with those who say cholesterol is very bad or those who say cholesterol is good. In reality, it depends on the value. There's also another test, another type of fat in the blood, not cholesterol itself, but a fat in the blood called triglycerides. For this one, we have a value that should be less than 150. Higher levels are also related to an increase in cardiovascular diseases. Triglycerides have a very interesting issue. When they are very high, especially values greater than 1,000, you would have an increased risk of inflammation in the pancreas called pancreatitis. So you also have to be careful about this issue of cholesterol and triglycerides. Number 9, low levels of vitamin D. Many studies are linking vitamin D to cardiovascular diseases. You've probably heard of vitamin D for bones. That is the classic function of vitamin D. What does vitamin D do? It helps our intestine absorb calcium, so it's fundamental for bone health. But over the years, we've been discovering other functions of vitamin D. For example, in immunity. And also regarding this issue of cardiovascular diseases, many studies show that reduced low levels of vitamin D may be related to cardiovascular diseases. So you have to be very careful with this vitamin D issue as well. Did you know about this function of vitamin D? For bones, probably, yes, but there are other functions as well that are being discovered. Very recent studies, especially from 2 years ago to now, they really highlight this issue of the heart with vitamin D. And what are the vitamin D levels? What values could protect our heart? In general, levels greater than 30 would be considered sufficient. In some cases, this value can be a little lower. For young people who don't have risk factors, levels greater than 20 would be sufficient. but I prefer this value to be greater than or equal to 30, remembering that there is also a maximum value. Generally, this range is between 30 and 80. Especially with levels higher than 100, you can have what we call vitamin D toxicity, right? With an increase in calcium in the blood, which can increase the risk of arrhythmia. So it's not just about going out and taking vitamin D. Be very careful with the information, but a deficiency can also cause problems. And number 10 is a sedentary lifestyle. Physical activity can also help with heart health, especially exercise values. In terms of minutes, exercise time, let's say, greater than 150 minutes per week. So if you do 30 minutes 5 times a week, that would already be enough for you to have cardiac protection. Or 50 minutes 3 times a week, and it can be whatever exercise you like best. I really like going to the gym, and I really like running too. I usually run 3 days a week and go to the gym 4 days to manage to get a full week of physical activity in. And you, what exercise do you like the most? Put it here, and I'll tell you if that exercise is good or not. And also, some studies show that if you can manage 250 minutes or more, it's a bit more complicated of a goal, I know. Depending on your routine, it's hard to do. But studies show that you could even have an additional benefit from a cardiac standpoint. And number 11 is about diet. A diet poor in antioxidants would also be a risk factor for heart disease.